March 1941. North Atlantic. The water was black and cold. Waves crashed against the hull of the German submarine U-47. Inside, Captain Lieutenant Gunther Prien sat at the tiny navigation table, studying charts by the glow of a single red lamp. His crew crept through the cramped compartments, checking valves, monitoring gauges, listening, always listening. Prien was one of Germany's most famous U-boat commanders, a legend. In October 1939, he had taken U-47 into the British naval base at Scapa Flow and sank the battleship Royal Oak. Over 800 British sailors died that night. Prien became a national hero. His face was on posters. Newspapers called him the Bull of Scapa Flow. The Nazi propaganda machine turned him into a symbol of German invincibility. But this mission was different. Hunting convoys in the open Atlantic, no glory, just cold water, bad food, and the constant threat of enemy warships. Prien had already sunk several merchant ships on this patrol. His torpedo tubes were empty. He was heading home, but the British were hunting him. The hydrophone operator heard it first. Destroyer, bearing 270, range closing. Prien moved to the periscope. Through the lens, he saw the grey shape of a British destroyer cutting through the waves and coming fast, coming straight at them. Dive, dive, take her to 80 meters. The crew moved fast. Hatches sealed, ballast tanks flooded. The submarine tilted forward and slid beneath the surface, down into the cold darkness. The electric motors hummed. The only other sound was the ping of the destroyer's sonar, getting louder and getting closer. Prien waited. He had done this before many times. The British would drop depth charges, big metal drums filled with explosives. They would sink and explode at a preset depth. The explosions would shake the boat. Lights would flicker. Men would hold their breath. But if you went deep enough, you were safe. The British depth charges rarely worked below 100 meters. Every U-boat captain knew this. It was common knowledge. The first depth charge exploded far above them, a dull thump. The hull shuddered slightly, nothing serious. The crew relaxed. Prien smiled. "See, too shallow, they cannot touch us down here." More explosions, all distant, all above them. The British destroyer made pass after pass, dropping patterns of depth charges, trying to hit the submarine, but every explosion was too high, too far away. After an hour, the destroyer gave up and sailed away. U-47 surfaced. The crew opened the hatches and breathed fresh air. They were alive, untouched. Prien wrote in his log, "Enemy depth charges ineffective, set too shallow, no danger to boat at normal diving depths." This was the story across the U-boat fleet in 1940 and 1941. German submarine captains did not fear depth charges, they respected them, but they did not fear them. Dive deep, wait it out, surface when the enemy leaves. It was almost routine. But things were about to change, and when they did, the laughter would stop. The problem with early depth charges was simple. They exploded at the wrong depth. British and American depth charges in 1939 and 1940 used hydrostatic pistols, simple mechanical devices that measured water pressure. When the charge reached the preset depth, the pressure triggered the detonator. The charge exploded. In theory, it was perfect. In practice, it was flawed. The pistols were unreliable. Sometimes they fired early. Sometimes they fired late. Sometimes they did not fire at all. The depth settings were limited. Most charges could only be set to explode at 50 feet, 100 feet, or 150 feet. Anything deeper required special modifications. And the charges sank slowly, about 10 feet per second. If a U-boat was at 300 feet, it took 30 seconds for the charge to reach that depth. Plenty of time for the submarine to move, to change course, to slip away. Allied naval officers knew the depth charges were not effective. They wrote reports, recommended improvements. But changing military equipment takes time, especially in wartime. Factories were busy producing existing designs. Engineers were working on other projects. The depth charge problem was recognized, but not prioritized. Meanwhile, U-boats were sinking ships faster than the Allies could replace them. In 1940, German submarines sank over 1,000 Allied merchant ships. In 1941, the number climbed higher. The U-boat captains called it the happy time. Convoys were poorly defended. Escorts were inexperienced. Depth charges were ineffective. The Atlantic belonged to the wolves. But in Britain and America, scientists and engineers were working on solutions. They studied captured German submarines. They interviewed survivors from U-boat attacks. They analyzed the physics of underwater explosions. And they realized the problem was not just depth. It was precision. A depth charge needed to explode within 20 feet of a submarine to cause severe damage, within 50 feet to cause some damage. Beyond that, the explosion was just noise and water pressure. Scary but not deadly, the solution came in stages. First, improve the pistols, make them more reliable, expand the depth settings. Allow charges to be set to 200 feet, 250 feet, 300 feet or deeper. Second, make the charges sink faster. Add weight, change the shape. Get the explosive to depth before the submarine could escape. Third, develop new weapons that do not rely on preset depths at all. Contact weapons. Weapons that exploded only when they hit the submarine directly. By 1942, the improvements were reaching Allied ships. New depth charges with better pistols. Heavier charges sank faster. Deeper settings that could reach U-boats hiding below 300 feet. And the results started to show. U-boat captains who had survived dozens of attacks suddenly found themselves in real danger. The explosions were closer, more accurate, more deadly. Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hardegen commanded U-123. In January 1942, he operated off the American coast during Operation Drumbeat. He sank 9 ships in 3 weeks. The American defenses were weak, almost non-existent. Hardegen surfaced in sight of New York City and watched the lights of Manhattan. He felt invincible, but on his second patrol, things changed. An American destroyer detected him off Cape Hatteras. Hardegen dove to 200 meters, deeper than he had ever gone before. The depth charges followed, and they exploded close, very close. The first explosion threw men against the bulkheads. Light bulbs shattered. Cork insulation rained from the ceiling. The hull groaned under the pressure. Another explosion, closer. The submarine rolled to starboard. Gauges cracked. Water began seeping through a valve. The crew worked frantically to stop the leak. Another explosion. The lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on. Men prayed in the darkness. Hardegen ordered the boat deeper, 250 meters. Beyond the design limit, the hull creaked and popped. Every rivet was under strain. But the depth charges followed, set deeper than before, exploding all around them. For 2 hours, the attack continued. When it finally stopped, U-123 had taken severe damage. The hydrophone was destroyed. One electric motor was offline. The rudder was jammed. They barely made it back to France. Hardegen wrote in his report, "Enemy depth charges have improved significantly, no longer safe at depth. Losses will increase." He was right. Other U-boat captains reported similar experiences. The charges were exploding deeper, more accurately, with better effect. The easy days were over. But the most significant change came with the introduction of new weapons. Weapons that did not require guessing the depth. Weapons that exploded on contact. The British developed one called Hedgehog. The Americans developed similar systems. These weapons changed everything. Hedgehog was simple but brilliant. It was a mortar. A spigot mortar that fired 24 small bombs in a circular pattern ahead of the attacking ship. Each bomb weighed about 65 pounds. Each contained 35 pounds of explosive. But here was the key. The bombs only exploded if they hit something solid like a submarine hull. If they missed, they sank to the bottom without exploding. This was revolutionary. With regular depth charges, every explosion created noise and turbulence. The attacking ship lost sonar contact, had to wait for the water to calm down, then search again. With Hedgehog, if nothing exploded, you knew you missed. You still had sonar contact. You could fire again immediately, and if something did explode, you knew you hit. The first Hedgehog systems were installed on British corvettes in 1942. The results were immediate. U-boats that dove to escape found themselves under attack from weapons they could not evade. The Hedgehog bombs fell in a pattern that covered the estimated position of the submarine. If the submarine were there, at least one bomb would hit, and one hit was enough. Captain Lieutenant Peter Kremer commanded U-333. In May 1943, he was hunting a convoy south of Iceland. A British corvette detected him. Kremer dove, 150 meters. The corvette followed. Kremer heard splashes, small splashes, not the heavy splash of depth charges, something different, then nothing, no explosions, silence. Kremer thought the British had missed. He started to relax, then one of the bombs hit. The explosion was different, sharp, focused. The bomb hit the rear deck and detonated. The blast tore through the pressure hull. Water rushed in. The stern compartment flooded instantly. 3 men died. The submarine tilted upward out of control. Kremer blew all ballast tanks and surfaced. The crew abandoned ship. U-333 sank in minutes. The British corvette rescued Kremer and most of his crew. He spent the rest of the war in a prisoner camp. Stories like this spread through the U-boat fleet. Captains who had laughed at depth charges now spoke in whispers about the new weapons. They called Hedgehog the devil's eggs, small bombs that fell silently and killed without warning. There was no defense, no way to evade. If the enemy had good sonar and good aim, you were dead. The statistics told the story. In 1941, only about 5% of depth charge attacks resulted in a U-boat kill. In 1942, the number climbed to 8%. By 1943, with improved depth charges and new weapons like Hedgehog, the kill rate reached 15%. That meant 1 in 7 attacks was fatal. For U-boat crews, those were terrible odds. Admiral Karl Dönitz commanded the U-boat fleet. He saw the reports. He knew his submarines were dying faster than they could be replaced. In 1943, Germany lost 237 U-boats. Over 5,000 submariners died. The Battle of the Atlantic was turning against Germany, and improved Allied anti-submarine weapons were a major reason why. Dönitz tried to adapt. He ordered U-boats to dive deeper, stay submerged longer, avoid surface action, but it was not enough. Allied technology was advancing faster than German tactics could adjust. The Allies developed better sonar, better radar, better coordination between ships and aircraft, and always better weapons. The British developed another weapon called Squid. It was even more advanced than Hedgehog. Squid fired 3 large bombs ahead of the ship. Each bomb weighed 300 pounds. The bombs were automatically set to the correct depth based on the last sonar reading. They exploded in a triangular pattern around the submarine. The blast from 3 bombs created a massive pressure wave. Even a near miss could crush a submarine's hull. Crack the pressure hull, flood the compartments, kill the crew. The American Navy developed similar systems. They also improved their standard depth charges. New Mark 9 depth charges could be set to explode as deep as 600 feet. They sank at 23 feet per second, almost twice as fast as earlier charges. They used improved Torpex explosive instead of TNT. Torpex was 50% more powerful. A single Mark 9 could destroy a submarine at 30 feet, seriously damage it at 50 feet. The margin for error was shrinking. U-boat captains who survived multiple patrols developed tricks. When under attack, change depth constantly, alter course every few minutes. release oil and debris to fake destruction, launch decoys that created false sonar returns, fire your own noisemakers to confuse enemy sonar. These tactics sometimes worked, but they required experience, skill, luck. And as the war went on, experienced U-boat captains became rare. Most died on their first or second patrol. Oberleutnant Zur C. Horst von Schroeter commanded U-667. He was young, only 24. He had completed submarine school in 1942. His first patrol was in January 1944. By then, the Atlantic was an Allied shooting gallery. U-667 left Brest on January 15. On January 20, a Canadian frigate detected them west of Ireland. Von Schroeter Dove. The frigate attacked with Hedgehog. The first pattern was missed. Von Schroeter changed course, changed depth. The frigate fired again. One bomb hit. The explosion killed 4 men and flooded the forward compartment. Von Schroeter surfaced. The crew abandoned ship. U-667 sank on her first patrol. Von Schroeter was captured. He later said, "We never had a chance. The British knew exactly where we were. Their weapons were too accurate, too deadly. We were fish in a barrel." By 1944, German U-boats were dying faster than Germany could build them. In the first 5 months of 1944, 90 U-boats were sunk. Only 15 Allied merchant ships were sunk by submarines in the same period. The exchange rate had reversed completely. It took fewer than 20 U-boats to sink 1,000 merchant ships in 1940. In 1944, it took 90 U-boats to sink 15. The war was lost. The technical improvements that made this possible were not dramatic. No single invention won the Battle of the Atlantic. It was a combination. Better sonar, better depth charges, better fuses, better tactics, better coordination. Each improvement added a few percentage points to the kill rate. Together, they were devastating. The hydrostatic pistol improvements alone made a huge difference. Early pistols had a 20% failure rate. By 1943, the failure rate was below 5%. That meant 15 more depth charges out of every 100 exploded at the correct depth. More explosions meant more kills. The faster sink rate of improved charges cut the time between detection and detonation. Early charges took 30 seconds to reach 300 feet. New charges took 13 seconds. That gave submarines half the time to evade. Half the time meant double the chance of a hit. The Hedgehog and Squid weapons eliminated the blind spot. Ships could attack while maintaining sonar contact. They could adjust their aim, fire again immediately, keep the submarine under constant pressure. U-boats had nowhere to hide. The psychological impact was as significant as the technical impact. In 1940, U-boat captains were confident, aggressive, willing to take risks. By 1944, they were terrified. Every patrol was a death sentence. Morale collapsed. Captains who survived one patrol refused to take their boats out again. Crews deserted. Some U-boats returned to port claiming mechanical problems that did not exist. The men simply refused to die for a lost cause. Admiral Dönitz tried to maintain discipline. He gave speeches about duty and honor. He promised new weapons. New submarines. The Type Roman 21 U-boat had better speed and endurance, but the new boats came too late, and even if they had come earlier, they would have faced the same improved Allied defenses. The exact deadly depth charges, the same Hedgehog, the same Squid. The war ended in May 1945. Germany surrendered. The surviving U-boats surfaced and hoisted black flags. They sailed to Allied ports and surrendered. Of the 1162 U-boats built during the war, 785 were lost. Over 30,000 German submariners died. The casualty rate was 75%, the highest of any branch of any military in World War II. After the war, captured U-boat captains were interviewed. They were asked what Allied technology hurt them most. Many said radar, some said code breaking, but almost all mentioned depth charges. The improved depth charges, the new fuses, the new weapons. One captain said, "At the start of the war, we laughed at depth charges. By the end, we feared them more than anything. They found us at any depth. They exploded exactly where we were. There was no escape." Navies around the world studied the technical details of the improvements. The lessons learned in the Atlantic shaped anti-submarine warfare for the rest of the 20th century. Modern depth charges still use contact fuses. Modern mortars still fire patterns ahead of the attacking ship. The technology has advanced, but the principles remain the same. The story of depth charge development is a story of engineers and scientists working behind the scenes. No medals, no glory, just men and women in laboratories and factories, testing fuses, calculating blast radiuses, improving designs. Their work saved thousands of Allied sailors, sank hundreds of U-boats, helped win the Battle of the Atlantic, and turned German laughter into German fear. The U-boat captains who survived the war carried the memories with them. The sound of depth charges exploding close. The hull feels like it is buckling under pressure, the sight of water rushing through cracks, the screams of men trapped in flooded compartments. They remembered thinking they were safe, thinking the British could not touch them, thinking depth charges were a joke, and they remembered the moment they realized they were wrong, the moment the new fuses found them, the moment they stopped laughing and started praying. Because in the cold, dark waters of the Atlantic, prayer was all they had left.